Welcome to Time Nexus. Today, we're diving deep into the explosive 600-year history of an empire that literally shaped the modern world. We are, of course, talking about the Ottoman Empire. Now, this wasn't just your average kingdom. It was the ultimate bridge between antiquity and the modern era. It's a massive story filled with incredible expansion, brilliant administration, and eventually a pretty catastrophic collapse. Throughout this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how a small nomadic principality completely transformed into a global superpower, one that stood toe-to-toe with the greatest empires in human history and forever altered the geopolitical map. Let's get into it.
First things first, let's immediately sweep aside the modern myth that the Ottoman Empire was strictly a Middle Eastern power, because it absolutely wasn't. Founded by Osman I way back in 1299, this state rapidly exploded into a massive, tricontinental juggernaut that stretched across Europe, Asia, and Africa. For centuries, Ottoman borders reached all the way from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Persian Gulf. They controlled the Balkans, Greece, and huge chunks of modern-day Hungary and Romania. They were just as much a part of the European political and military fabric as France or the Habsburgs, holding down strategic territory across 3 distinct continents.
So, you might be wondering, what was the secret sauce behind this massive expansion? It was sheer, terrifying technological supremacy. Specifically, it was their early and devastating mastery of gunpowder and a weapon called the harquebus. You see, the Ottomans didn't just outfight their enemies, they completely out-innovated them. By deploying these early matchlock firearms, they forced a monumental shift in warfare. They basically replaced traditional, heavily armored feudal knights with highly disciplined, firearm-wielding, professional standing armies. This advanced coordination between artillery and infantry allowed them to absolutely crush Byzantine, Serb, and later Mamluk territories in a fraction of the time it took earlier conquerors. This technological edge ultimately built up to one of the most pivotal turning points in human history, the year 1453. Picture this. At just 21 years old, Sultan Mehmed II did the unthinkable. He shattered the supposedly impregnable walls of Constantinople and brought an end to the 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire, the Second Rome. But here is where the Ottomans truly proved their political genius. Audaciously, Mehmed didn't just burn the Roman legacy to the ground. Instead, he claimed the title of Caesar for himself. He actively preserved and absorbed the Roman administrative heritage, integrating Byzantine legal structures and bringing the greatest artisans and intellectuals into his newly minted capital. They essentially became the new Rome. Now, to govern an incredibly vast and rapidly expanding territory like this, you need an ironclad administrative engine. And for the Ottomans, that was the Devshirme system. The state would draft Christian boys from the European Balkan provinces, convert them to Islam, and put them through rigorous elite training. The paradox here is absolutely stunning. While technically enslaved to the Sultan, these boys received the absolute highest education available anywhere. The best of the best rose up to become the leading administrators, grand viziers, and the core of the legendary Janissary military corps. It was a mechanism that quite literally transformed conquered populations into the very backbone and most powerful figures of the entire Ottoman state apparatus.
But here's the thing. Military might and elite administrators alone cannot hold an incredibly diverse empire together. I mean, how do you keep millions of Christians, Jews, and Muslims from tearing each other apart across 3 continents? Well, you definitely don't force complete assimilation. The state managed its tremendous diversity through the totally ingenious Millet System. Instead of demanding religious uniformity, the Ottoman rulers granted different religious groups the right to operate as relatively autonomous, self-governing communities. Each millet operated under its own laws, its own customs, and its respective religious leaders.
Under this setup, the religious leaders of each millet handled the day-to-day administration for their own people. We're talking marriage, divorce, education, internal security, and even community justice, all dealt with locally, which seriously minimized broad societal friction. So while Western Europe was tragically tearing itself apart in bloody religious wars, the Ottoman reality on the ground was a deeply complex, highly organized, and functioning multi-ethnic society. It practically managed daily life and preserved social order for centuries. Though, to be fair, there were still inevitable localized tensions and competition between these different religious groups.
Now, to really get the full picture, we have to zoom out, because the Ottomans were absolutely not acting in isolation. It's vital to understand their place in the broader global economy. In the 16th century, the Ottomans were the Western pillar of a massive triad of wealth and power, sitting right alongside the Safavid Empire in Iran and the Mughal Empire in the Indian subcontinent. Together, These three gunpowder empires stretched in an unbroken chain from Vienna all the way to the borders of China. They commanded the world's most vital land and sea trade routes, bridging incredible economic gaps and collectively holding the balance of global power against the rising states of Western Europe.
Right at the absolute center of this era of global dominance was Suleiman the Magnificent, known significantly to his own people as the Lawgiver. Under his legendary rule, the Ottoman Empire reached its absolute cultural and political zenith. You see, he wasn't just a brilliant military conqueror, he was the grand architect of the empire's golden age. He refined a unified, standardized legal code to finally replace centuries of duplicate and contradictory laws. And under his patronage, the unmatched architect Mimar Sinan built monumental structures, like the breathtaking Süleymaniye Mosque, that literally still dominate the Istanbul skyline to this very day.
This era highlights a completely fascinating cultural paradox. While Habsburg armies were fighting Ottoman soldiers in grueling, bloody battlefield campaigns, the citizens of Europe were simultaneously eagerly consuming Ottoman culture. The Ottomans introduced coffee and the entire concept of coffeehouses to Europe, which is highly ironic considering earlier Ottoman sultans had occasionally tried to ban coffee themselves for sparking rebellious thoughts in their own cafes. The empire also popularized the cultivation of tulips, brought early life-saving smallpox inoculations to the West long before they were common practice, and heavily inspired classical European music. The Turkish style, from silk fashions to upturned slippers, became an absolute obsession in European high society.
But as history shows us time and time again, empires do not rise forever. The aura of Ottoman invincibility was permanently shattered in the summer of 1683 during the catastrophic Second Siege of Vienna. Ottoman forces had encircled the Austrian capital, fully prepared to strike a fatal blow directly into the heart of Central Europe. But the siege spectacularly failed. The Ottoman forces were violently routed, resulting in the panicky flight of the Grand Vizier, who literally abandoned his magnificent tents, vast treasures, and personal effects behind for the Europeans to capture.
That siege was broken by the dramatic and timely arrival of Central European allies, spearheaded by the devastating cavalry charge of Polish King John Sobieski and his famous winged hussars. They completely broke the Ottoman lines, and this wasn't just a severely lost battle, it was the definitive historical turning point. It marked the permanent reversal of power dynamics on the continent. The Ottoman advance into Europe was halted forever, and from this momentous defeat onward, the empire would largely find itself fighting strictly on the defensive.
Fast forward to the 19th century, and the geopolitical reality had drastically changed. The mighty empire that once terrified the globe was now grimly referred to by Russian Tsar Nicholas I as the sick man of Europe. The empire began to fracture severely, both from within and without. A wave of nationalist revolts saw historic territories like Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria successfully fight for their independence. Simultaneously, rival industrializing powers, Russia, Britain, France, and Austria, were circling like vultures, aggressively competing to carve up the remaining Ottoman territories to feed their own imperial ambitions.
This aggressive shift in European attitudes is perfectly captured by British politician William Gladstone, who coldly declared that the Ottomans should be driven bag and baggage from their possessions. It's a really stark illustration of just how far the empire had fallen in the global hierarchy. They had completely transitioned from a feared, world-shaping superpower that used to dictate terms to kings into a vulnerable, overextended target of Western colonial ambition and political maneuvering.
The final dissolution was incredibly rapid and brutal. First, the 1878 Treaty of Berlin stripped away huge chunks of their remaining European and Balkan holdings. Then came the ultimate fatal miscalculation, entering World War I on the side of the Central Powers. Crushing defeat in the First World War led to the empire being literally partitioned by the victorious allies. Finally, in 1922, the 600-year-old Sultanate was officially abolished forever. But out of the ashes of this fallen empire, an army officer named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk fought a fierce war of independence, officially declaring the modern Republic of Turkey in 1923.
Which brings us right back to today. The empire itself might be gone, but its fingerprints are absolutely everywhere. As we look at the fractured geopolitics of the modern Middle East, the complex cultural demographics of the Balkans, or simply that cup of coffee sitting right there on your desk, we really have to ask ourselves, how much of the reality we live in today is still secretly dictated by the echoes of this 600-year reign? It's a legacy written right into the very borders and cultures of our world. Thank you for joining me on Time Nexus. Keep questioning the past, and I'll see you in the next explainer.